Oh, hello world. You can't see me yet, but I'm Dan Shaheen, your old pal. Let me get rid of this thingamajig. Hey, welcome to Comic Book News. Today, man, we're going to talk to somebody really exciting. We're going to talk to Erik Larsen. He's one of the founders of Image Comics, but he's also just like a cartoonist. He's one of the most prolific solo cartoonists of all time. He's got within reach. He's got the record is in sight of 300 plus issues by a single cartoonist. I'm sure he's going to get there. We're going to talk to him about what? We're going to talk to him about the past, how he got into comics, why he loves comics. We're going to talk about the Dragon. We're going to talk about his early days. We're going to talk about how he got into mainstream comics, how he found Image Comics, and what's next for Erik. Having some audio problems. Erik told me he can barely hear me. Anybody out there, you guys hear me okay out there in YouTube land? Please say it in the comments if I'm garbled or distorted. Just let me know. I want to say thanks to all the fans out there. Thanks to everybody who's been tuning in and watching. If you haven't already, please consider clicking that subscribe button. Please think about clicking like. Maybe wait till the end before you click dislike if you don't like it, but that's up to you. So I want to say that we're going to look at the comments, guys. We're going to get a key little Q&A from the comment section for Erik, but we're going to wait till the end to do that like we normally do. So we're going to concentrate on a conversation between myself and my guest. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Let's bring in Erik Larsen. Hey, welcome to Comic Book News.
Hey.
Okay.
Maybe you need to send me the YouTube link so I can listen to it that way.
So, Erik, you're gonna give me like a Carol Burnett signal if my audio is just garbled.
I know, but you're on my end. You're all like you occasionally turn into R2D2. So,
okay, I'm gonna blame either the StreamYard gods or I'm gonna blame mysterious hackers. I did see that my my Twitter somebody tried to log into my Twitter from Canada recently after my last stream, and I'm not sure what was going on. I'm going to chalk it up to coincidence. But today, Erik, we're here to talk about you, man. We're here to talk about comics. We're here to talk about the Dragon and Image Comics and everything in between.
all right.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into comics. What was the first comic you can remember reading?
My dad read comics when he was a kid, so we grew up with his old comic book collection. That was always a part of our lives. Just when I was super little. So those were my first comics. Were like the old Golden Age. He had a big run of Captain Marvel Adventures. He had a lot of the old EC comics. A smattering of DC stuff, no Marvel. It was just like this bunch of old stuff. So Captain Marvel Adventures was a big one, and then I just started. For whatever reason, I got hooked. So the first comic I ever bought that I can remember was Incredible Hulk 156. So that was kind of my gateway drug into buying comic books. And just after a couple of years, mostly starting around 5th grade, I just kind of got into it more and more, and kind of went into it big. But also, I started drawing my own comics super early too. So like around 4th grade, I just started just drawing my own comics, and they were just 8.5 by 11, folded in half. I would use everybody else's characters because it's like, I thought that was totally fine. So having Superman or Batman or somebody drop by seemed totally cool. And but that was when I had created my own character, the Dragon, who was a blatant ripoff of Batman at the time.
Okay. That's not what I expected you to say.
Well, that's what it was, because the fin was part of his costume, and then he had a little mask. So his whole costume, he had a green mask instead of a blue mask, and then there was a little face hole so you could see his flesh-colored face, and he had a big old green cape and a utility belt, and he drove a cool car. And
now this was before the Savage Dragon. You just called him the Dragon.
Well,
right?
it wasn't called the Savage Dragon really until Image Comics. Right. And the only reason he was called the Savage Dragon then was because Dragon Magazine kind of piped in and said, you can't call a book the Dragon, there'll be confusion in the marketplace and all this other stuff. So it's like, all right, I'll just put a descriptive word on it and let it go with that. I've since done several miniseries where I just call him the Dragon, and they did.
I mean, any regrets like about that? Do you feel like the Savage name you're fine with it? It's stuck. It's great. It's part of the brand now, and because your website is savagedragon.com and
yeah. It took me actually years to kind of get used to it. When I would talk about the book, I would always call it Dragon or the Dragon. But sort of as time's gone on, I'm just like, all right, I guess this is what people know it as. So
I think maybe
here we go.
Maybe it was a good thing, right? Because just dragon is such a generic term of art, or whatever you want to call it, that you've the Savage Dragon. There's only one Savage Dragon, right?
Yeah. So. I would hope.
Okay, so you were drawing comics early. I'm sure. I'm guessing your dad, who was a comics fan, was supporting you in that endeavor.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I was just a kid who drew all the time. So whatever I was doing, it was just this constant state of drawing. If I wasn't drawing comics, I was just doing illustrations of some sort. And when I was doing my homework, I'd be drawing on that. And I was just one of those kids who was constantly just drawing away like a maniac.
Was there knowledge in your mind at that time that like a comics artist, a professional comics artist, was even something one could be? Like, I've heard cartoonists say that like they didn't even understand what that meant. They just loved to draw them.
Yeah, I don't think I knew what that was. I didn't really have much of an understanding of what that was a profession that existed. But just kind of I kind of worked my way through school or whatever, and at some point, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way came out. I'm not sure what year that actually came about, but at that point it was like there's all sorts of knowledge that suddenly appeared in there. It's like, oh, you draw it bigger and then you can reduce it down. That's amazing. Or all the different aspects of that like, oh wait, you're supposed to write the story first or whatever. However you're supposed to do this stuff, it became somewhat clearer to me, like, oh, you draw it this big and this is the size people are using.
Yeah.
this is the kind of paper that people are using and stuff like that. By the time I was in high school, I kind of had figured out some of that stuff. And I actually took a class. There was a night class that was through the community college there on cartooning. And it was taught by some guy who was just terrible. But I went
a professional.
Kind of. I was going to school, and it was Mendocino, California at the time. So he was like a local cartoonist who had stuff in the local paper. So it was super funky stuff that he was doing, just kind of hippie stuff. And I'm growing weed in the backyard, and here comes the man, sort of cartoons. And his stuff was just super crude. He had a really kind of muddy, ugly style, and he was using craft tint, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a kind of paper that when you apply a different liquid to it, different things will show up. There's duotone, and there's a number of different names for that sort of stuff. But he was using that, and so his work was kind of muddy to begin with, and then he would go in and put all this texture stuff, and then it would be like super muddy. Like, I can't tell what the hell I'm looking at here. But whatever.
Anything useful you got out of that, though, as far as storytelling or anything else? Or
I mean, there was really not much I got from that other than, this is something that people do. And there would, because there was a group of us who kind of were really into comics, there ended up being several kind of after school things that would be put together just because we were into it, So like when I was in middle school, there was a comic book thing, but the teacher there had no idea. He just was like, okay, I'm basically just this will be a period where kids come in and draw, and I'm just watching them. So that
which
was
ironically is probably like the best way for a kid to learn to draw comics, right? I mean, just give them some time and let them draw.
Yeah, that was. I couldn't hear a word of that, but
I'm sorry. I think there might be some bandwidth problems on your end too, because
mail me the link to the YouTube thing, because I can watch it on that, and I'll hear you clearer on that because people are hearing it on that.
They seem to be. I'll try to talk slower. Maybe that might help. Wait a minute. I'm gonna try something. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna mute me.
Seriously, try that out. So, try sending me a link, and we'll see how it goes through that. Because I think it might.
Now I'm gonna unmute me. Is that any better?
A little bit.
Well, let's try to. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna flash up a graphic, a word on the screen, and you can just talk about that. Tell me about Gary Carlson.
I got to find a way.
Oh, you can't hear me? You still can't hear me?
I really can't. I can't hear a word you're saying.
What can you tell me about Gary Carlson, though?
I'm going to YouTube, and I don't know what.
Any better, Eric?
Okay, that's.
This is hilarious.
Okay, now you sound great. As Gary Carlson, you sound awesome. What the hell?
Cool.
Hey,
so
thanks,
tell me about Gary Carlson. If you can't hear me, what I'll do is I will just flash up a graphic, and you just talk about what I flashed it down there. So we'll use that for now. So tell me about Gary.
Gary came about because I had at one point when I was 19, I self-published a fanzine called Graphic Fantasy, and that came about mostly just because of the just learning how to do this stuff. There was a company called Charlton Comics, which had done a book called Charlton Bullseye, and their idea was we can't pay you a dime, but we can get your stuff in print. So a number of aspiring creators did stories intended for Charlton Bullseye, and they would get them colored, and then they would print them, and then the creators they kept their own copyright, so they owned everything themselves. So I had drawn this dragon story up for that, and so I had that done. I submitted it to them, and they said, unfortunately, this book didn't sell well enough for it to continue. We think your stuff's pretty good, though. You might consider submitting to Marvel, DC, and all that stuff. So I just took that story and put it as part of this fanzine, Graphic Fantasy. I'd run into a couple other wannabe artists at a comic store called King Arthur's Bookshop in Bellingham, Washington. And there we go. Look how terrible that looks. My dad had a tabletop offset press, so we owned a printing press ourselves. And my thought was, oh, this will be awesome. I'll be able to print my own comic books on this printing press. The problem was that the press had a small bed size, so it wasn't huge. And so the paper that we had, I had to cut it down in order for it to fit through the press at all. And so the paper was not, they weren't all uniform. And so what had ended up happening is, because of that, the paper would go a little bit askew, and it made it really tough to align any kind of color at all. So you can see like the coloring here looks a little off and a little terrible. And that's just because the printing press was so funky. I had really this narrow band that I could print. So you see the top where there's the logo that says Graphic Fantasy. That was actually a separate plate to the bottom, which had the drawing on it. So I would adjust my paper so it was feeding through on the far end, and I would get the bottom part for the drawing, and then I would adjust it all the way the other side so that I could get the top part for the logo on the top. And it's such a jerry-rigged thing.
It's a beautiful thing.
Luckily, the interiors were all black and white, so there was no alignment issues of any kind inside, because that narrow band worked. But for the cover, in order to have it bleed off the bottom, sacrifices had to be made. And it just, initially the idea was, I'll do a color comic and this will be great. We'll color the whole thing. But it was such a madness, because I was coloring it using Zipatone. So there's these black and white plastic sheets with dot patterns on them. And what I wasn't accounting for, if you look at like this flying guy's wings, there's all sorts of moire patterns there, which is areas where the two Zipatones are just a little bit off. And what happens is some of the dots line right on top of each other and some of them don't. And so you end up having this weird pattern where things are fading in from dark to light to dark to light. And it looks terrible.
Oh my God. You had a really young trial by fire.
I had all these printing problems, but we printed this comic, and then it was, we took ads out in the Comics Buyer's Guide, and we sent it out to anybody we thought might review it. We got a couple reviews from a couple places, and what that did is it got our address out. And so Gary Carlson contacted me, and he was like, I'm putting together my own comic. I'm looking for warm bodies. Your stuff, I like your stuff. Let's put together a comic. And so, yeah, this second issue, all sorts of crazy workarounds here in order to make this work. But you notice that it's drawn with all this black around the figure. And the reason for that was so that I could line the colors up better. It was entirely for that. It was so that so that if the green was a little bit off and to the left or a little bit off and to the right, it's going to be in a black area. And so it'll look fine. And that was
Wow.
the whole, but you can see that the yellow that was used as his skin color is totally on his leg. And so it's like, I couldn't get it completely right anyway. There's the blue, the dark blue that was for his foot on the one side is ending up being on his arm there. So it's like, I'm doing the best I can, man, and really trying.
I think this is great because just that trial by fire of printing yourself had to make you aware of the challenges of reproduction of comic art and a lot of the things that probably a lot of people just don't think about even if they want to be a comic book artist.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of things like that where I was just figuring this stuff out, a lot of trial and error, a lot of just stumbling in the dark, just going, how do I do this? I need to be able to do this. But Gary gave me a gig, and I co-created a character with him called Vanguard. And then I was off and running at that, and it was just a matter of getting work and trying to work my way through the system and trying to build up something. So every time I would do anything for anybody, then it would be, let me send this to the next guy and maybe I can get the next gig and then send that on. So after I had gotten a few, I did Americomics before I did any stuff at Eclipse. So like Sentinels of Justice and crap like that. That was fairly early on. And that was right after I did stuff for Gary. So I'd done a couple things and I just got a little bit of work from Gary, and it was enough that I kind of had something to show the next guy. And so I sent that out to Americomics, and they bit, and they gave me a little gig. And that was, I got to have some comics that were actually in color with AC Comics. Then I ran into Jim Shooter at a convention in Chicago. I had been sending him my stuff on a continuous basis. Whenever I would do anything, it would be like, here's some more, here's some more. And so when I ran into him, it was like, so you're a professional now? And I was like, yes, I am. and then he said, how'd you like to do a story for Marvel Fanfare? Which I didn't know was code for how would you like to do an inventory job. But because Marvel Fanfare was like a big gig at that point. It was a high prestige format, some of their best format kind of stuff.
A beautiful comic,
so
one of the best looking.
When he said Marvel Fanfare, I thought he meant Marvel Fanfare, right? But whatever, So when I told somebody else, I was like, I'm going to be in Marvel Fanfare. They're like, oh, he promised you an inventory job. That's what he did. It's like, oh, okay. But what I said to Shooter at the time was, let's plot it at the convention. And he was like, all right. And so the two of us sat down at one point and plotted out a Hulk versus Thor story, which ended up eventually showing up as an issue of Thor 385. And so Jim and I plotted it together, and he ended up having Stan Lee script it, which was like, oh, that's kind of a coup. And then Vinnie Coletta inked it. So it was like me subbing for Jack in the classic. I mean, it was Stan's last issue of Thor, and it was Vinny's last issue of Thor. It was the last issue either of those guys worked on. So it ended up being kind of cool. At the time, it was a little like annoying because Stan rewrote the story so it didn't make as much sense as it initially did. And he ended up doing some art fixes that made it so it was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make the sense that it used to make when it was plotted. And then
so you got the authentic lead.
Oh, I got the authentic treatment. Yeah. I mean, and Vinny just destroyed whatever.
And then he came in.
I got the full treatment. I got a real Vinny job, and I got some John Romita Sr. fix-ups on some things. Like there's an occasional Romita head in there, so it's like I got the full treatment. was awesome.
So in hindsight, that is awesome, right?
In hindsight, it's super awesome.
Yeah.
At the
That's
time,
really
it was like, oh, I can't breathe. Vinnie Coletta's just ruined whatever I did. And it's like, whatever. The broad strokes were there. It's big.
Literally.
Yeah. I mean, but in terms of the storytelling that was part of that particular story, that all came out. That was all fine. It was all there. So, if you got the idea, you got the idea. So that worked out all right.
So tell me, what, if anything, did you learn specifically from Jim Shooter? He's one of the most interesting cats to me in the world. I would love to interview him on the show. He's really, really high on my wish list of people to interview.
You know what? The problem with me is I either didn't hear people or I wasn't paying attention or whatever. I didn't learn jack shit from anybody. It was purely me taking in as much comics as I could and internalizing it and making up my own rules as to, this seems to work, this doesn't seem to work. Why does this work? Why doesn't this work? What am I getting from this? And I would go from one artist to another, just kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, what about this works well? And what about this doesn't work well? Do this, don't do that. And so I was really just learning on the fly from other comic book artists and what they were able to do, as well as, everything else. Carl Potts used to send people a book. He would just, it's the 5 C's of cinematography. And he would just send you this book. Like, you need to read all this stuff. I don't know if anybody read it. I certainly didn't. But
so was that during your time on The Punisher? With Carl Potts? I thought he was the writer.
Yeah. He was on that. And part of it was like, that was part of his gig was, I'm going to teach everybody storytelling and everybody's going to take all this in and get this all figured out. But yeah, I didn't.
Well, you wrote
undisciplined. I was really always one of those does not work well with others kind of guys.
Well, you wrote on your website, by the way, savagedragon.com is a terrific website. And I started out on Wikipedia and then I ended up on your website, and you've got a great biography of your career. So it was really easy to put this thing together. It said, though, it made one sentence that said, like, you were not a perfect fit for the Punisher, or something like that. And I feel like there's some subtext there.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that I was not a perfect fit. And it's mostly because I wanted to do those big Marvel comics. That was what I grew up with. I just loved all that stuff. And so I wanted to be Jack Kirby. So I was like, how come these guys aren't knocking each other through walls? I want to do this big action stuff. I want to draw huge, crazy made-up guns, not real specific guns.
Okay.
When a helicopter shows up, I want it to be this crazy Kirby made-up helicopter, not an actual real helicopter. So I just kind of felt confined by the real world and reality, and that's really what they wanted on that book was, if you're drawing a raccoon, I want you to reference a raccoon and draw it so it looks like a real thing, and all that other stuff.
Well, I actually skipped one thing though. I skipped Doom Patrol and your time at DC because that was prior to. Was that prior to you having the Jim Shooter meeting? You had already done this work for DC, or it was after you did Marvel work that led to the DC work?
The Jim Shooter stuff was fairly early on, and that once I had those samples of the Hulk kicking the crap out of Thor, it played to all my strengths, which was doing action stuff. That was what I was good at. All of the people standing around jawboning on anything, I couldn't draw that to save my life. But if characters were kicking the crap out of each other, I was good for that. So once I had those samples, I sent those around to everybody. Mike Gold was kind of championing my stuff over at DC, and he wanted to get me on Teen Titans, and Marv wasn't having it. And so I did like Teen Titans Spotlight on Aqualad, and Teen Titans Spotlight on whatever, Omega Man. And then I did A Secret Origin of Nightwing. And I did one issue of the Teen Titans, but Paul Levitz was writing it. And I had drawn one issue of Superman that Marv had written. And I think that's what really soured him on me, because it was like, this guy is terrible.
Oh, no.
Like, so yeah, there's this big close-up on Superman's face, and it really made him crazy looking. And Jerry Orbe ended up inking that face just because, like, I got to turn this back into a human being.
But somehow, I mean, I'm guessing that your work was on time and you delivered your work.
Oh, I knew that. I knew that I had to be the guy who was making those deadlines. So I was definitely like, yeah, if you need a job and you need it fast, I'm your guy. I'll get that done. So there were times where there were different books would become, they just needed a warm body, and it's like, how long do you have for that? You got 2 weeks? I'll have it to you in 2 weeks. Bam, I'll get it done. So I would just go firing through this stuff at a breakneck pace, because it's like, I got to be that guy. If nothing else, I got to be super dependable. But I was also a pain in the ass, because I would, if something didn't make sense in the plot, I would just rewrite it. And so the writer I was working with on Doom Patrol, he would get stuff that would just be me just freestyling because I didn't like what he did. And it was like, well, what the hell is going on here? You can do that? And he never contacted me and complained about it. The editor seemed fine with it. So it just seemed like, what the hell? I kind of use it as like, he had this issue where Robot Man's brain is in a tube and he's on an alien ship. And so I read the plot, and it was, and in the plot, he's like, Robot Man uses his brain power to figure out how to run the ship using his brain connected with the ship. And I was like, it's just so not something that he would be able to do. He's just such a lummox that that doesn't make any sense to me at all. So instead, I had Robot Man giving the villain crap, and then the villain just punched the tube that he was in and sent his brain scattering along the ground. Okay. And then I was like, I have to have the ship run haywire. How can I get the ship to run haywire? So I had other characters do stuff that made it so that the ship went haywire, and it worked out. I hit the beats that needed to be hit in terms of the story, but those particulars were like, this doesn't make any sense. Let me accomplish what you want to accomplish, but do it a different way that makes more sense for the characters. I don't even know if I was talking with the editor about it at all. I don't even know if I was going through it. I could just very well have just been going, this is the way comics are done, right?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Are you pushing back on the script and suggesting a script change, or are you just getting the script and you're turning in the pages your way?
I don't remember, because this is like 32, 33 years ago, right? So I just remember the results, and I kind of remember what the story was. But there were other times like that too. There was a story that I was sent at Marvel, that they were trying to get somebody to draw this Luke Cage thing, and they had sent it to a number of different artists. It was going to be like a graphic novel or something, just a one-shot, like, cool Luke Cage thing. And they'd sent it to Rob Liefeld. He did a bunch of character designs for coming up with a new costume for Luke Cage, and then he decided, for whatever reason, he didn't do it. And then it was sent to a bunch of different people, and then it ended up getting sent to me. And I'm going through this plot going, yeah, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. So I came back to the editor and said, look, here are all these problems with this story, why it doesn't work. And the editor was like, my God, you're right. I'm going to talk to the writer about that. and you talk to the writer, and the writer ended up pulling the plot entirely, and just the project never came to be just because it's like,
you knew it.
Sorry for torpedoing your awesome story there, buddy, but
okay. So you're talking like you got a reputation as a troublemaker. You're pushing back.
I was a total, like, yeah. And I don't know that if I had a reputation of it, but I certainly had a high opinion of how to do comics. And I had like, in my brain, it was like, I've got some of this stuff figured out. I got why this works. And now that I'm older and looking back at him, I'm going, God, that kid has some balls, man. It was like I wasn't smart enough to know how dumb I was, sort of, you know?
Yeah.
And now that I'm looking back at it, it's like, I wouldn't put up with any of this shit from anybody, but somehow or other.
Here's what here's the disconnect for me is, okay, then you were at Marvel and you were on Punisher. It wasn't a good fit. And then you go from there to how do you come to this? How do you go from the troublemaker guy to the flagship title of the biggest comic publisher?
It was a little skip and jump. Basically what had happened is I was also in touch with an editor named Terry Cavanaugh who'd given me, who I would kind of back and forth on a little bit, and I had drawn one story for him that was just kind of sitting there, and I had pitched him on doing a Nova serial for Marvel Comics Presents. So he just needed guys who could do 8-page stories because they had to fill that thing up. They had 4 different 8-page stories that were in every issue, so they just needed stuff. And so I pitched him on this 5-part Nova serial where I was going to bring back that guy. And so basically what happened there was, oh shit, I forgot that I did an issue of Spider-Man a long time ago. I forgot about that. At some point, Jim Salicrup they just needed somebody to do an issue of Spider-Man. I was doing DNA Agents at the time, and they just needed somebody. And so it's like, I'm your man. And I just drew an issue of Spider-Man in 2 weeks because they needed a dude. And so it's like, here you go. And then I didn't follow up and going, I need more Spider-Man, because it wasn't like he would offer me the gig. It was just like, I've got this editor over at DC who's actively trying to give me stuff, actively trying to get me work. So why am I going to chase after this Spider-Man thing? Which, like an idiot, I should have just been like, I want to do Spider-Man. I want to do it now. But I didn't. Also, my Spider-Man at that point was kind of terrible. So, but I did. So the editor, Jim Salicrup, knew that I did this Spider-Man thing. He knew I'd done that one issue. And then when I went and did Punisher, I don't think that stuff resonated with him at all. But then I went to do this Marvel Comics Presents thing, and I was going to do Nova. And then the editor was like, I know that you just quit the Punisher so you could do Nova, but you can't do Nova because he's going to be in the New Warriors, and the writer on the New Warriors has his own way of giving Rich Rider his powers back, and your story that you came up with no longer fits with that. So you're now out of work. But I've got this serial, Excalibur. Do you want to do that? And I was like, I have no other work, so yes, I will do that. And those samples, doing that story for him, that's what got me into doing Spider-Man, because I ran into Salicrup at a convention. And I always would have like Xeroxes or whatever it was I was doing so I could show different editors. And Salicrup came up to me and he needed somebody to do a fill-in on Spider-Man at that point because Todd was running late. And also I'd met Todd by that point. We kind of knew each other. And so he needed a warm body. And I was like, I'm drawing you on the spot. I was like, okay, I'll do your thing. And then I guess he liked it. It worked out. And my first issue was right in the middle of a continuing story with Todd.
Yes, yes. I remember I was reading that issue off the shelves back then.
So the first one that I did has a Todd cover, and it's got Sabretooth on it. So it was an earlier one than that. But that was the one that.
Oh, yes, from Assassination Plot or something.
Yeah, assassination thing. They needed somebody.
That's where I remember.
A weird thing on that story was that I had I did my story, which is a fill-in, before Todd did the previous issue. So the previous issue was super late. And so there was a character named Solo that I designed in the next issue, and then kind of Todd needed to refer to mine as when he was drawing his. And I knew Todd at that point, so I was actually up at Todd's apartment at one point, helping him out, penciling in some Solo costumes onto various pages so that he could just ink it and get those costumes right. So it's crazy the way the whole deadline thing was, where you're just like, oh, I need to do this. We would always like pinch in and help each other out. In various books, you'd be looking through that. There's issues of Spawn where there'll be a random, like a page that I inked or a page that Rob inked or whatever. In the first issue of Youngblood, I inked a page. In a couple issues of X-Force, I inked 3 pages in issue 2 and 2 pages in issue 3. It would just be, we were pals. We were constantly like, oh, I need some help here. Can you fill in here? Can you do this? And so we were constantly kind of swapping stuff back and forth.
So when you took over for Todd McFarlane on Amazing Spider-Man, he was basically at the zenith of his popularity at that moment.
Yeah,
like that was, he had made his rock. I was reading.
He had made his
Incredible Hulk.
Yeah. And he was going great guns on Spider-Man, and that was going good. And
so when you took over for him, did you feel a lot of pressure? What was the reaction? What was your because I remember being like looking at it and going, it's not Todd McFarlane, but then reading who I loved at the time. But then going on it, you got me with your storytelling techniques. It was a different rendering style, but it was the storytelling and the fun, and maybe the stories.
The two things. I had learned a lesson on the Doom Patrol because I had followed a guy named Steve Lytle on the Doom Patrol, and he had a very specific kind of style. And when I came on board, I just didn't pay any attention to what he was doing at all. I just was like, I'm doing my own thing. And if you liked what he was doing, it could not have been a more abrupt style shift from his work to mine. So I learned a lesson there, which was ease the transition, just ease it a little bit. Look at what the previous guy did and then kind of work your way towards what you want to do in the book. And so when I was following Todd, it was like, well, he's doing these funky borders and Spider-Man was more contorted poses. And so it was like, all right, do kind of that sort of thing so that when you ease into your own stuff, that it's not quite so crazy abrupt. And also I was really aided by Todd no longer being on the book. So he was gone. There was nothing there. So if you loved Todd's stuff, it wasn't like you could go and buy something else. There was no anything else. It was famine. There was nothing for you. So the hope was that if you were reading the book before, that you just keep reading the book, because it was like, oh, I'm a Spider-Man reader now. I like the way Todd drew. I'm going to like the way this new guy does it, and we'll just keep it going.
I mean,
So
not to mention you got the legacy of Amazing Spider-Man too.
yeah,
And I'm guessing it was what the top selling book of that day.
it was doing pretty well. It was doing. I don't know if it was if it was the top selling book, but it was certainly doing reasonably well. So I did that as best I could, and had an all right time doing it. But again, it was a pain in the ass because it would be like, I don't feel like drawing this, or I got a different way of doing things. But it also was one where the writer really left a lot of room. He was really open to interpretation because what he would do is he would describe the splash page, and then he would in this plot it would say pages 2 through 22, and then he would just ramble. And then he would do that occasionally he would break it down a little bit. So it would be like pages 6 through 10, pages 11 through whatever that. But a lot of times it was really just whatever. So because of that, it gave me all kinds of room to kind of flex with stuff. Like, I want to do more fist fight stuff. I'll extend that and then take the people talking. I'll just cram that into as few panels as I could. And so I was able to kind of get what I wanted to do there. So.
And then you're working classic Marvel method, I'm guessing. So then after your pencils, it comes back for scripting on. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Right. Scripting, and then would send on to the inker, and occasionally there would be stuff where they would have stuff redrawn, and somebody else would end up drawing a panel or two because I strayed too far from whatever the hell they wanted.
Okay. So so you hit the ground running on Amazing Spider-Man. You had big shoes to fill in Todd McFarlane, and you picked up that mantle. Those are classic stories that are beloved to this day. People loved reading them then. They still love them. So then what happened between then? You got a big gig on one of the top comics ever. It's Amazing Spider-Man. That's a dream come true, I'm assuming. Yeah. What happened between that and the foundation of Image Comics? How did this happen?
How did that happen?
That's in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, Rob Liefeld was curious to know if the people who were following his stuff at Marvel would follow him to another book anywhere else. Basically, want to know, is it the book or is it me? So he had pitched. He kind of was going, How come DC doesn't do X books? We should do X books over Marvel can't own the letter X. Let's do X stuff here or there. And he had pitched them on, I want to do a book called Teen Titans. And it's going to have, the descendant of there was a character that was in I think in the Omega Man, there was a big old dude, so he was going to have it be like a version of that, and then he had Speedy, and then he had Harlequin, and all those characters eventually end up becoming one of the Youngblood teams. It's like Speedy just became Shaft, and his big rock guy based on Block just ended up being Badrock, and Harlequin became Vogue. And it was just like, you can look at DC Comics at that point and go, oh yeah, that's kind of that guy, and that's kind of that guy. Cool. So
and it worked, right?
It worked fine. But so yeah. Rob had pitched. Rob just decided, okay, this DC thing didn't go. They either didn't approve it or he didn't like the deal or whatever. So at some point, me, Rob, Jim Valentino, and Dave Albrecht, who is a guy from Malibu Comics, had gone out to dinner. And Rob said, hey, would you publish a book that I did? And Dave was like, they were publishing small black and white comics, so they weren't publishing big stuff at all. But he was like, sure, I publish a book to you. I publish a book for any of you guys. And so Rob got in his head, I'm gonna do an X book for Malibu Comics. This is be awesome. And so they took out an ad in the Comics Buyer's Guide announcing Executioner by Rob Liefeld. This will be great. And so it's got all these cool characters jumping around. And then Marvel saw that ad and they flipped out. They were like, oh my God, we're going to sue you. This is too much like what you're doing for us. And this character is obviously Cable and this character is obviously this and that. We're going to come after you. And what happened with that was it was blood in the water. You kind of know there's like, oh, these guys are scared shitless that we're going to go elsewhere and we're going to become something.
Yeah.
They've made us into superstars, and now they're seeing that this could all come undone. And really that was it. So you know, I'm in.
They knew it. They knew it before.
I'm in. Valentino's in, and then it became, you know, Todd going, oh, why didn't you tell me you guys wanted to do something like this? This is awesome. And so then it was like, oh, we got Todd. And then it was Todd did a full court press on Jim Lee because it was like, he's Marvel's golden boy. You know, and it was the three guys who had done their three big books at that point. You know, they had the X-Men, they had X-Force, and they had Spider-Man #1. So it's like, if we could get all three of these guys, then, you know, then this is going to be big. And so that's what happened. It's like, we got him, and then Mark came on board, and then Wills came on board, and it was like, all right, we got our gang, and we just pulled it all together, wrote some very basic rules as to how this was going to work. And it was like, you know, everybody's book is your own book. If somebody approves a crossover, that the issue you did is the issue you own that in perpetuity. If I use your character in my book, that's approval forever. I can always reprint that issue forever so that there never is any dispute. You don't share any money from my book. I don't share any money from your book. If you use Dragon in your book, what I get out of that is cross promotion for my title, and that's it.
So how much were you aware of guys like Bill Shannis and Pacific Comics and the kind of like creator centric deals they had offered people before? Because I thought
not really any.
Okay.
Not a lot. I knew that those comics existed. I knew that Pacific was a thing. I knew that there was such a thing as creator-owned books because there were self-publishers and there were other things like that. But I really wasn't that aware of what those specific deals were. I mean, I know that Malibu, the initial deal with them was, I think Rob on Youngblood 1 got a 75-25 split. So he was getting 75%, they were getting 25. Todd pushed them further so that it was a 90-10 split. So we were getting 90, Malibu was getting 10. But those numbers were so big and they were so much better and more impressive than anything Malibu had ever done before that 10% was huge.
Yeah. So
they made out like a bandit. They also got a flat fee on top of that. So it was like every book they got $5,000 plus 10%. So they did great. And they were able to expand their empire pretty much immediately. They started, I think they saw the writing on the wall really within that first short period of time. So they're like, we want to set up our own superhero company. And if that's not what is driving this, then we're also going to set up our own bunch of creators who just own their own stuff. So we're going to have both of these, but in both of these things, we're going to own chunks of this stuff rather than have the other people, we're not going to do the Image deal again, basically. So that's how Bravura came about as a creator-owned thing, and how the
Ultraverse
came about, which was a shared creator-owned superhero line. So yeah, so we ended up being there for 1 year exactly.
Yeah, it didn't last long, right? And you guys decided you can do it on your own.
Yeah, we could do it on our own. Also, we fought so that the covers just said Image Comics. There was no marking saying Malibu on the covers at all. So that really, when we left Malibu, the only thing that changed was there was no longer a logo on the inside front cover.
Okay, so tell me about.
You even noticed that.
Savage Dragon #1, then was this in Malibu, or this was after the foundation?
That was Malibu. Yeah. So the Savage Dragon miniseries was at Malibu. The Savage Dragon ongoing book was Image Comics proper.
Got it.
And there's that logo.
Love that logo. In fact, wait a minute. We gotta do you better than that. When I forgot, I got it. Oh, ready to go, right up there in the corner, right above you.
So but that logo that's 2 edits later. Like, it started off on the first issue, it said The Savage Dragon, and it was a much taller logo. I shortened it. It got to be the short, fat version with, I think, issue 100. So prior to that, it was the longer logo. I lost the word "the" with issue 42, so it's just going to say Savage Dragon now instead of The Savage Dragon. And it's always just, what do I do to make this more readable? How do I get this, whatever. And
this is the ultimate iteration. This is the final iteration.
That's the final iteration. That's what we got now. Although I don't ever do fades on it, just because it's easier to read. It's always about legibility. Yeah. I want it to be a distinctive logo, easy to read, be able to pick it out on the newsstand. You need to be able to find the damn thing.
Okay. I think you pulled that off, Eric. So you finally now you're in. You're the publisher, essentially. You became the publisher. You're not.
That wasn't such a great thing.
Yeah, you're in the group of publishers, so you're one of the publishers, I guess.
Yeah. And we own our own comic book company. So, at that point, there's nobody who can say, yeah, don't do that. You do whatever the hell you want to do. You make the book you want to make. And, there's no editorial oversight at all. At this point, I send JPEGs around to a bunch of people just so they can try and spot typos. And occasionally they do. And then
I spotted one on your website, Eric. I'm going to send it to you later.
Yeah, well, that happens.
So now you're in charge. So you ran the show, and you ran off you decided, look, this is my book. I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to do a bunch of 6-issue miniseries and write it for the trade necessarily. Or did you? Did you start off with a vision of where you wanted to get to at 300 issues or 500 issues, or where you wanted to take the Dragon to? Or is it a fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing?
You never know how far you're going to get, and you never know how long it's going to last. But I had done those 2 issues of graphic fantasy when I was a kid, 19 years old. So my thought was, I'm going to work towards those stories. So I want these stories to eventually be part of the regular Savage Dragon continuity.
Wow.
So I'm not, when I was, because these basically were the capper of all the comics I did when I was a kid. I drew like 55 Savage Dragon comics when I was a little kid. And then these stories when I was 19 years old were sort of the culmination of everything that I'd done when I was a kid. And so that was the end of that. That's the point I reached as a kid. So now as an adult doing doing comics at Image was I'm working towards those. So I eventually want to be able to redraw those stories and have them be issues of Savage Dragon. So that was the goal.
How far away are we from that?
That was the goal. So when I did it as a kid, it was started with William Johnson can turn into a superhero and dresses like Batman and runs around as a utility belt, and eventually those two characters are pulled apart, and then Dragon becomes his own guy, and he meets some girl, and they have a kid, and then out of wedlock, and eventually they get married, and then she gets killed, and then he's part of the superhero group, and so it's all this stuff, which if I was to redraw all those stories, it's like, this doesn't make any sense. It's just from the mind of a kid in 4th grade or 5th grade who doesn't know what the hell the world is. So it's like, I can't do that. But I've got, by the time I'm 19, those stories kind of make a little bit of sense. So now as an adult, I'm going, all right, I need to have, this character needs to be set, this character needs to be introduced by that point. That character needs to be introduced. He's got to have a wife who's dead. He's got to have a daughter who's alive and living with him. He's got to be the ex leader of a government superhero team. And then it was, and so what I really was doing when I'm starting Savage Dragon is, okay, what would be the logical steps that make sense, which could get to that same point. So with graphic fantasy, I started here and worked towards the middle. With Image Comics, I'm starting here and working towards the middle. It's the same middle, but I'm taking 2 different paths to get to that same point. So those issues were eventually worked into and there are issues 63 and 65 of Savage Dragon. So I redrew those stories completely, using pretty much the same layouts. I was doing kind of a Gene Colan thing in Graphic Fantasy #1, so my panel borders were all cockeyed. I wasn't doing that by the time I was doing Image Comics, so I was like, all right, I'm doing it more straight, square, so I got to square up those panels. But other than that, the basic storytelling information that was in those comics when I was 19 are going to be in those same comics as a real grown up. So that was the thought, and then once I was there, then it was I can go anywhere. It doesn't matter. At that point, I'm free, and I did what I accomplished, and I could go wherever I wanted to go. But I did know early on that I want to have the book set in real time, because I want to have there be real progressions with these characters. I want them to eventually be married. I want them to eventually have a kid. I want them to eventually. So there's all these pieces of it that needed to be in place to get me to be able to tell those stories. And so at that point, it was like, I'm already going, so real time is in motion. So let's just see how this works. And that was also one of those things that every fan at some point is like, oh man, I just turned 30. I'm actually older than Superman. What a bummer. I can't believe Superman's always going to be 29. Wouldn't it be cool if these characters grew up with me? Wouldn't that be awesome to have Peter Parker get married and have Peter Parker have kids and Peter Parker's life to move on? And it's like, and my thought was, let's see how that works. Let's try this out and see how that works. And I knew, well, Marvel can never do that, because they're not going to have successive creators coming up with new Doctor Dooms and new Green Goblins and new iconic characters that they can build on, because creators don't want to give. They saw that Stan got the shaft, and that Jack got the shaft, and that Steve Ditko got the shaft, and creators have been screwed over for years and years and years. So they're not sitting there going, hey, take my stuff, take it all. They've learned those lessons. And so, but on my own, I'm going to come up with new stuff. I'm not worried about me coming up with new characters. So I'm just gonna keep going with this and see how long I can keep these balls in the air and see how long I can continue this thing. Now I have a couple characters that are stuck in time because aging them ruins them. So like the Deadly Duo will forever be, sort of the grown up and the younger guy. And that's the way that book is gonna be forever. And so it's kind of weird at some point you'll go, wait a minute, Kid Avenger was alive before Malcolm Dragon was even born. And now Malcolm Dragon is older than the Kid Avenger. What the hell?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. But we can either make an explanation for it and put it in writing as to, okay, this is what goes on with that. He's a guy from the future and his costume's keeping him young. And Killcat's got 9 lives because he was bitten by a radioactive cat or whatever. I can cobble together various dopey reasons why that can work. And there's a couple characters that are like, oh, I'm a god, so I'm not gonna get any older because I'm a god. That's what we do.
I think the first time anybody ever tried the real-time thing that I can remember was your pal Jim Shooter on the New Universe. Those were all real-time books as well. And they were all written and drawn by editors mostly.
Yeah.
Some of Todd's earliest work was on Spitfire and the Troubleshooters, right? Written by Elliot R. Brown, friend of the show. And
3 days. That's what Todd figured out in 3 days.
I think that you're right, though, that for a single creator, the real-time thing can work because it works with your life. Your life is aging in real time. Your character can reflect your life. In a shared universe scenario with different creators, I think it would be
that's the problem, is that I'm in a shared universe situation. So if Mark Silvestri is sitting there going, I'm not aging Cyberforce.
Yeah.
Then there gets to be some weird things if you decide to focus on those weird things. If you don't bring it up, nobody gives a shit. For the most part, nobody cares.
That's the beauty of the comics. That's the beauty of comics.
That's the beauty of all this thing. I mean, if you're a reader of comic strips and you love and you go and research old comic strips and you read Blondie, you go, Blondie and Dagwood were married and were a couple before they had kids. And this neighborhood kid, Elmo, would come over and be a pain in the ass, right?
Yeah.
Well, then they had kids and they had little babies, and Elmo would come over and play with the babies. And then those kids grew up, and Elmo eventually was the same age as Alexander, their son. Now those kids are teenagers, and Elmo is still a little kid who comes over and bothers them. And it's like, Elmo hasn't changed. And yet, clearly, like 18 years have passed for everybody else in that strip.
It's interesting, though, that you bring up comic strips and that sort of thing, because, a lot of people, if they're like, okay, I'm going to go on a 300 run issue, I'm going to hone my style. I'm going to lock it in. I'm going to evolve it slightly, slowly, but I'm going to keep my style. You seem to have made a bunch of periodic choices to say, okay, I like my style, but every once in a while, I want to try drawing in a completely different style. And by style, I don't mean you switch from Neil Adams to Barry Windsor Smith. I mean, you're switching. Tell me about this book that we're looking at and your philosophy on style.
The problem with being in complete control of your own work is if you can do anything you want, that's a lot of options. It just becomes you get this kind of paralysis where you're just like, there are so many choices. I can do so many different things. I can't decide what I want to do. And I'm like that every page where I'm like, there are 30 different things I could do here. How do I limit what I'm doing? And so occasionally what I'll do, as just a guy creating a book will be, I'm just going to come up with a super confining thing just to take all of these other choices off the table so I don't have to be preoccupied with all this other crap. You know, doing the This Savage World story was like, all right, I'm going to kind of do it in a, I'm not emulating Jack Kirby really, but I'm going to be using those kind of 6-panel grids that he was using, and I'm going to limit it to those kind of grids, which takes a lot of options off the table. You know, pages 2, 3 are going to be a double page spread. There's going to be 6-panel grids and 4-panel grids and all this stuff. And you just, I'm getting rid of a lot of options. I was kind of paying attention to Commandy. One of the things that in Commandy that he would do was it was really focused on Commandy. He didn't do subplots with other characters. It's like, we've got this camera on Commandy and we're following him. He's having these adventures. And there are issues of Commandy where he's on every single page of the entire issue. There's not a page that he's not on. So that was my approach when I was doing This Savage World thing. Was I'm doing this crazy grid. I'm not doing full bleeds anymore, and I'm going to do this is my format. It's focused on Dragon. And then, you know, eventually I worked my way through that, got bored with it, moved on to something else. But there are a bunch of different things along the way where I'm like, what can I do that I haven't done? What can I do that I haven't seen done? And try different approaches with different things. You know, try something out. What's never been done before? Let me try to do away. One of those was I did an issue which was it's page 1 is 20 panels. Page 2, it's 19 panels. 2 of those panels have merged. And so they're now the big panel on that page, which is still a 20-panel grid, but 2 of them are merged. Next page, those 2 pages that were merged are still merged, but now 2 others have merged. And then you go and through the entire thing, I want them to merge in interesting ways. I want it to be obvious which panel comes next always, so I don't want it to merge in some weird way where you've got this odd shape. I want the shapes to always be rectangles, so I know L-shaped panels. And I want it, whenever it expands to a bigger panel, it's got to be bigger for a reason. Why is that bigger? Okay, it's bigger because I'm introducing you to a character or event, or something necessitates a bigger space every time. And then you end up on a splash. The last page is a splash. And it's like, that is a hell of a confinement to have to work around.
Yeah.
You know, every time those panels are bigger, there's got to be a reason for it. Something bigger is going to be going on throughout an entire comic. And you want it to merge in an interesting way. And it's like, holy crap, that's a lot of stuff. And in that case, I had pages that were ruled out, and I didn't even get to them for like a year because it was like, initially I was going to use it for one story, and it was like, no, it's not going to work for this one. I got to save this one for something else.
I'll be honest,
but
the things
like that throughout, where I'm constantly going, what haven't I done? What haven't I done?
Yes,
what haven't I done? I did an issue last year, I want to say, maybe 2 years ago, where I had done kind of a comic strip thing every other page, and I would do like a Calvin and Hobbes-ish kind of thing, and it was Savage Little Dragons. And just was like, you know, every other spread would be like, here's a comic strip kind of thing, mildly emulating Bill Watterson, but not. I didn't do it full press. Like, I really want to nail this, but my letterer did. So he made a real effort to try and nail Bill. And it was like, dude, you did good. But when it came to this latest issue that just came out, it was like, all right, I've done the warm-up act of doing Calvin and Hobbes for 5 different strips. Let me really do and just go full in hard on this. You know, do a cover that's Blondie and Dagwood.
Awesome.
do page 1 is Family Circus, and then I do a Peanuts riff, and then I don't remember which order they're in because I shuffled them around afterward. They actually don't appear in the order in which I drew them, because it was like I did the Dick Tracy strip pretty early on, and the thing with the Dick Tracy strip is it's really, really hard hitting, like, you know, riots or it's police violence, and the police are like beat the shit out of a character, and it was like I can't have this character get mauled and then not address it for the rest of the issue. So I couldn't have the Dick Tracy one be super early on. It needed to be right towards the end of the book. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work pacing wise for the whole issue. And a lot of it, I just ended up shuffling things around because I didn't want there to be too many pages where you flip from one page and now hear the same characters looking different. So I tried to pace it so it'd be like, here's the dragon characters. Now we're cutting away to the Freak Force characters. Now we're back to dragon characters. Now we're checking in on, Paul Dragon meeting William and Rita. Now it's back to the dragon characters. Now it's, so I tried to pace it that way so it wasn't too much of the same characters again and again and again, changing head size and proportions and stuff like that.
Did you find one artist's style particularly difficult to, because I mean there's a wide variety of styles on the comic strip page. I really love comic strips too. Guys like Hank Ketchum are just such a genius level artist. Did you do it, Dennis?
Oh, well, first I read like a million different comic strips, so I made a short list of strips that I thought could work in this style. There were a bunch of them that were eliminated really early on just because their style is so far removed from Savage Dragon that that it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't. You would go, oh, you're imitating Alex Raymond, which you can't do anyway because you're not that talented, right. And you don't have anything that's set in space. So if it's not set in space and it's not a futuristic thing, you're missing all the trappings that make it a Flash Gordon riff. So don't even do Flash Gordon, So a lot of the strips depend on some kind of a strong visual hook or some character, Like if you're doing a Garfield riff, you need a cat. And so it's like, are you going to introduce a cat just to kill a cat? And so you don't have the cat anymore, which I had blown stuff up and I was going to do it. I was going to do like a Garfield riff and I was just going to call it Fartfield. And it would just be this just stinky cat that they get. It was just this horrible thing. It would just, poop in the cat box and then walk around the house with these rocky mittens, and it would just be stinky and it would be terrible. And then the little girl who has electric powers just fries her, and that would be the end of it. But it just seemed weird. Some of the strips were like, well, if I'm doing a Calvin and Hobbes thing, I don't want to have there be two different orange cats that are kind of doing that. So then Garfield I tossed that one out the window. I wanted to do, there's a strip called Tiger, which I really like. It's not a live strip anymore. I don't think they might still be running old ones, but it's this kid who's got a baseball cap that's down over his eyes. So you seldom see his eyes. And it's another sort of Peanuts kind of strip in that it's told right from the kid's point of view. So you don't interact with adults. You don't see adults really. Occasionally you'll see their feet or their hands, or they'll be cropped off. But I really like the style of that strip. But it depended so much on the kid wearing a baseball cap that it was like I can't have the kids wearing hats because they all have fins on their heads. So
Huh.
they physically can't wear a hat. So how is anybody going to know that I'm aping this strip? And it's
Who's
also
going to know Tiger anyway? That one's pretty obscure.
it's kind of obscure. It was in our paper, so it meant something to me. I mean, as it is now, I did a strip called Tumbleweeds, which that's not a strip that's going now. So it's and it's like how many that I thought the style is so strong and so distinctive that I thought I could carry it without there being the cowboy thing. And also I had the Freak Force characters were set they're in an Indian reservation at this point. And so I was able to pull in an Indian chief looking character who looks like he walked right out of the Tumbleweed strip. So it's all right, that was close enough that I could pull that off. But I mean, a lot of those styles are really difficult because in some cases the artists just aren't very good. I mean,
don't talk about Mel Lazarus that way. That's not okay.
Well, look at Kathy sometimes, and you go, everything about the strip is poorly drawn. You don't even know what a hand looks like. It's all so foreign. She's only drawing characters from the front or the absolute back, so that completely destroys however you're thinking of composing panels, because it just takes a huge amount of things off the table. It becomes, you got to have characters are talking to each other and they're like that. They're like right next to each other.
I don't want to pick on Kathy Eyes White. Let's say maybe Dilbert. Did you do Dilbert?
Even strips like Peanuts, where you think, well, Charles Schultz is a great artist. He can do all this sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, but he'll do straight on, he'll do 3/4, but he would never do like a head in perspective at all.
Right.
He doesn't do real perspective stuff. And that, takes takes a bunch of things that you're used to doing off the table.
Yeah.
I'm used to be able to, the camera can be anywhere. I can do a down shot. Well, there's no down shots in Peanuts ever.
Right.
That doesn't happen. We're not going to do all sorts of stuff. I mean, you look at, Snoopy's house. There's never an angle where you're looking at it and realizing that Snoopy is lying directly on the point of a triangle, But we just show it from the side and you just figure that he's lying on a flat surface somehow, even though that doesn't exist, and it just works.
It just works. The
animators were having all kinds of problems with animating some of the Peanut stuff, because it would become like, oh, Linus's arms aren't long enough to put his thumb in his mouth from anything but this angle.
Right.
And so, suddenly they're like, oh, we're really limited as what we can do, because these characters can't actually function except from this one specific angle where these things sort of work.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting because they're able to put their style into just such a focused way, and the genius of a Charles Schultz is how much he was able to do with such a limited set of camera angles. So right,
and same thing with Kathy. I mean, Kathy she was able to do a lot of things, but like with my own trying to come up with different ways of limiting my options, there in some of the strip artists' cases, their options are automatically limited by just their own artistic ability. So it's like when you're sitting there, Dilbert, it's like, I can only draw characters from this angle and this angle, and I've got the one exterior shot that I use over and over again, and I'm recycling the same panels and the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, those strips are really small. Strips are really about rhythms and things.
Mm-hmm. I think that was doing this book. It was like, I want to capture both the rhythms of the strip and it's got to work with the rhythms of my strip
Yes.
of my book. So it's like I've got all these things that need to line up. And it just became super complicated as to, how do I do a Kathy strip? Which character does that work with? How do I do, and there was various things too, like, okay, family circus. All the suggestions were, hey, you should do where he's running around the neighborhood,
Yes.
the dotted line thing. It's like, yes, but the family circus really is that circle which they would use over and over again. The family circus Sundays is a different format, but I was thinking I want to do the circle because the circle is in so many of those strips. I really want to do that. And also I needed 2 strips that could be the bookends of it, because it couldn't all be double page spreads, because that would throw everything off for when I'm doing the eventual trades. Is I can't have it.
Let's talk about trades. We got a couple things. I got a couple more dragon topics to talk. One of them, before we get to trades, I want to ask you about this, because in all the stuff I read, it was like Erik created this character, he created that character, he created Freak Force, he created a cast of hundreds in Savage Dragon. And then somewhere along the line, you bought somebody else's character.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Ant and Mario Gully, and that just seemed like an unusual move compared to the rest of your history, cartooning and publishing.
Well, I'll tell you how that one came about, and that was Mario Gully had pitched us on doing Ant when I was the publisher, and he wanted to do Ant, and I always liked the visual of Ant. It's one of the kind of characters that I like, which is it's so stripped down in that it's such a basic idea of, it's just essentially a nude figure with no face and these big antennae. And it's like, it's so basic, which is, like it's a dragon type of design. It's a green guy with a fin on his head.
Almost like super simple.
Very, very basic. So I like the visual of it. When he was doing Ant on its own, it was basically the story of a little girl who was being tormented, who would have these fantasies that she would draw in a sketchbook that she had. So she was always drawing these escapism fantasies where she was an adult superhero having adventures. Which was, you felt for the girl, you felt for her plight and all of that. But the problem was none of her adventures as a superhero had any consequence whatsoever, because she wasn't real. That the superhero stuff was, oh, she's in peril. What are you going to do? Rip that page out of your sketchbook and come up with a different way? It just, there was nothing. So Ant couldn't, while that Ant could meet the Image characters, she couldn't really interact with the Image characters because it was just drawings in a kid's book. So we had long discussions on how can we make this work in Image? And I was like, well, one of the ways to do it would be to flip the script and just be that now she's an adult superhero. And when you want to do your kid stuff, those will be flashbacks of, remember when I was a kid and was being tormented? Well, I had this this flashback is informing me of this thing. Now I'm an adult superhero, and that same kind of situation is coming into play. So I can use that past experience informs my present time. So I can still kind of hit the same beats. It has the same problems in it, but it's in the reverse. I mean, because now none of the kids stuff has any consequence, because she grows up to become this adult superhero. So, I mean, if you're complaining about the limitations, it's got those same limitations, but now your character can interact with all the Image characters.
Yeah.
And so
that's a problem, right? You can say the kids, of course the kid grew up, now she's a superhero, and these are flashbacks. So that fits a lot better to me. So we had a lot of conversations on stuff, and I kind of acted
on that book like the de facto editor on it. And at one point, towards the end of it, when it was looking like, okay, he keeps running through different people who are writing it, and he kept having falling outs with those people and different whatever. And at one point, I was like, well, let's just give this story some closure and wrap this damn thing up. He had 7 pages that he had drawn, and he had at that point had a falling out with the writer or whatever. But he had these 7 pages that were done. And so I was like, well, let me just end your story for you. And I did layouts for 13 pages of his story. I just did like quick thumbnail pages of just do this, bam, 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 bam. And this will get you to a point, and it'll end it. And he was like, great, this will be awesome. And then he didn't do it. And then more time went on, and eventually he not only lost those 7 pages,
no,
he didn't have the files anymore, and he had traded computers, but because he had the falling out with the other writer, now there were characters in there that he couldn't use. And so then it became, all right, well, I'll tell you what, I'll draw layouts for 7 pages that bridge from here to here. And it's like, here you go. And then he didn't do it.
Oh, no.
And so eventually he got himself into a money thing where he was like, I'm in a bad way. I need some money. Would you be interested in buying my character? Because he knew that I loved the character. I loved the visual. And also that I was invested just story-wise. Like, I had ideas for this character. I had ideas for how to do the book and different approaches. And so it was, how much do you want for it? He gave me an asking price. I cut him a check. It was as simple as that. And
Great.
And so I'm actually drawing that issue from my own layouts. And at some point I'll publish it. But it's mostly drawn at this point. It's mostly ink. Okay. At some point I'll get it.
We're looking forward to that for sure. Okay, so now you brought it up, but I had a topic ready. Catching up with Dragon. Like, I looked and I'm like, what's the best way? I remember when I was a retailer a long time ago, all the Savage Dragon trades were not in print. So it was all at the same time because there's so many. And it was difficult to try and get someone into a 300 issue story or 200 issue story without pushing them towards the earlier stuff. A lot of people want to know the early stuff. So what's your recommendation? Somebody's brand new, they're excited. How do they read Dragon?
Yeah, the easiest, simplest way and least expensive is that I did a book called Savage Dragon Archives, which just reprints it all, 25 issue chunks in black and white. And it's
otherwise there are color trades available.
There are color trades, but it's scattered, and it's mostly more recent than old.
Yes.
So it's there, but it's not. It's not the whole thing. If you want to get every single issue, that's kind of not a possibility.
I mean, what would you recommend to someone if they wanted the true experience? Would you recommend trying to pick up the original issues?
I work toward that's my preferred format is the individual comics, because I like that it has a letters page. I like that it has backup stories. To me, it's sort of like it's a complete thing. The problem is it's expensive because there's those issues are hard to find. So and even now I'm hearing from people who are going, I just want to get it from issue 200 on, and those back issues are crazy expensive. I was just looking.
Print runs were even slower probably compared to the crazy early image days, right? So there's probably less.
If you want issue 1, those are available in abundance. There are 640,000 of those.
Yeah.
But if you want to get issue 201, there are only going to be 4 to 5,000 of those. So it's a lot fewer copies available.
Okay.
So that makes it difficult. That makes those issues expensive. And there are recent trades. So, I mean, what I would do if I were really like, I want to have it all or as much close to all of it as you can, would be either start with the archives and just deal with it that way, or buy back issues and then get trades from the point where they start getting expensive.
Okay. That makes sense.
And there are trades that start really around issue 138, I think, up. There's a solid run of trades from that point.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of where it starts getting a little pricier anyway. So that works. I would like to do eventual, full color big trades, but it's just so many issues that it becomes cost prohibitive in a lot of ways. And that ends up being the problem.
Yeah, I really like the Marvel. You're doing like what they used to call like maybe the Marvel Essentials style, black and white, big, thick, chunky one. They've got those new Marvel ones that are full color in a thick format like that.
And they're kind of skipping around, which I thought was an interesting approach to just go, we're going to hit these issues, we're going to jump over there and do those.
Greatest hits. Okay, speaking of which, Erik, we spent a lot of time talking, but man, there's people. We still got 38 people just waiting in the wings to ask some questions. Do you mind if we go to some viewer comments and
all right? I'm going to fire through some of that.
Yeah, we'll go through that quickly, and then we'll split out ski. Let's see.
All right.
Okay. Hey. Oh man, friend of the show, friend of mine, former hijinks customer, and Erik Larsen super fan Nate Costa says, "Hey, look, two of my favorite comic book guys on earth. Hi guys."
Get to the question, man. What do you got?
He's got nothing, man, because Nate knows everything. When I wanted to talk to Erik Larsen, I went straight to Nate. And I go, Nate, give me some details. Give me some stuff to ask. Give me the things, because he's read every single issue. And how's it go?
He's a good guy.
All right. Coffee Breath. Oh, another longtime supporter of the show says, sup. Danny Rendon says, my comment was deleted from your last video. Yeah, a lot of comments got deleted from my last video. Nate says, I hear you. that was our audio when we were having audio problems. Going back in time, way to the beginning here.
All right.
You just fine. I told you, Erik, it was your fault. I think it was your bandwidth. You had bandwidth problems for a second there.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure I've got all kinds of problems.
Yeah, but he wants to yell, Mr. Dong.
So much crap available. So much crap on all that's open at every minute that it's like my computer is always super slow and just going, no.
Before this show, I have to shut everything down. I have to do the same thing, or StreamYard really lags. Tony Capel says, this is great. Thank you both. Thank you, Tony. Thanks for watching. The next one says, F that Cecil guy. I don't know who that is. Okay, Heron. Oh, another supporter and a cartoonist. This is a cosplay and comics troupe out of Pittsburgh, my hometown.
Nice.
Heronbrook says, catching the first 20 minutes. Love the great female characters in the series. Dart, Smasher, Rapture, She-Dragon, and Mighty Man.
Yeah, it's been. I like writing. I like writing every character. I like writing female characters. I like writing characters of color. I like doing everything. So
cool. They hear us. We got a swan. One of my favorite comics, Thunder Bunny, came out of Charlton Bullseye. I'm a huge Charlton fan. I wish I had known about your Charlton connection. I would have worn my Charlton T-shirt that I just got.
It's barely there in terms of an actual real connection, because they didn't publish anything. I absolutely love that stuff though.
I think it's
Charlton stuff. That was it, Nick.
At least it wasn't a mimeograph machine. That's what we used in the 80s to run off comic zines in high school in our friend's mom's office when she wasn't looking. Talking about your self-printing.
Yeah. We had it was a tabletop offset press. So it's a little different from that. and it was super limited as to what we could do. But my dad was teaching workshops, so he had need of cheap printing, and I was his press guy in that. So that was
awesome.
me, just helping him out. And at some point, I was like, "Oh, I can make my own comics."
Eric von Stugel says, I can interact with the live chat now, kind of. People got blocked on our last stream for just saying not nice things.
Oh, sweet.
Chris says, hola. Henry Martinez says, I'm loving the full treatment story, especially Vinny. I don't know what that means. Interesting cousin. You got that Shaheen smile. This is my cousin and rock star, Henry Peter. Thanks, Hank. Let's see. I'm so sorry, Eric. I'm not sure what he's sorry for because this came a long time ago. This was an hour ago. Interesting interview for Comic Printing and History. Thank you, Hank. Are you removing the like-dislike ratio and comments on this too, as well as changing the video name after? I might. I usually do change the video name. But I haven't decided what that title might be. I will keep the like and dislike ratio showing, as I usually do. Not always.
You don't have to show all these guys. You can flip through them.
I am. We got a few more. We got a couple of people that paid something, so we got to show.
Oh, okay.
I'll go real fast. We don't have to answer them either. We're just going to go through them. Eric is awesome.
All right. I'll take that.
Have that Aqualad book. Loved it as a kid. Dan is disappointed to see you're the kind of man who can only give criticism. I would unsubscribe from your channel, but I was never interested in subscribing in the first place. Good luck on YouTube.
It's such a dick move. You're a dick. Hey,
Eric. It hurt. No, it's okay.
I don't mean to criticize you, Eric, but you're a dick. Who would say such a thing? That is funny to criticize somebody for always giving criticism. You would think you would praise all the times you say nice things if you really didn't want to hear it.
Did I criticize a lot tonight? I don't know. Maybe. My wife says I do that, so it might be true.
Whatever. Well, it's more fun. It's more fun to bitch about things than it is to say nice things.
Ain't it the truth? What's the deadline situation like nowadays? I don't know what that means. Like
the deadline situation is you're supposed to get your work done, and the editors give you a deadline, and people blow it, and then their books don't come out on a regular basis. But the idea is this stuff's supposed to be monthly. We try to make it monthly as best we can. We're all doing the best we can, and people are led to distraction. But that's just the way of the world. For sure. Disappointed when you left Doom Patrol. Probably the only person. Oh, come on. But I have that whole run. Loved Wayne and Blaze and Lodestone. Celsius was insane and loved the JL5 homage. Yeah. That's so ballsy. You better be sure the changes you're making are great. I think he's talking about you making. Yeah. When I was making those adjustments to stuff, it's like I think people didn't complain because it worked out already. You know, it's like if I had a terrible thing, it would be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Then I would have heard about it. But
okay, yep, a lot of comic stories make that mistake of just doing its own thing while ignoring what's happening before. And I'm referring to stories. He's talking about continuity.
Oh, yeah.
Now
that's one thing I do miss. When I was a reader, I was super into The Incredible Hulk. And the one thing that I loved about that book, it was the best baton handing of any comic that I've ever read before or since. And that The Incredible Hulk, when Herb Trimpe was drawing it, that was my gateway drug. I got into that was like, oh, I love this guy's art. I want to get every issue of this comic. And so I went back and got all the back issues I could find. I got as far as I could, and then I was reading it as it comes out. And that book seemed like it would get a new writer every year. And so when the next writer would come on, he would have to address, these are the ducks that are in a row. I got to deal with all this stuff. And then I want to do my own cool stuff. So I'm going to introduce this, and this. And so each guy would come up on board the book going, what do I got? What hand am I being dealt? I got to play with the hand that I'm dealt. And it's not like that so much now, because now it's everybody's telling their big arc, and then the next creator who comes aboard is sitting there going, well, here's the big thing I want to do, but they're not dealing with the cards they're handed.
Yes.
Which is like when I did Supreme, one of the things I wanted to do on that was I want to do the baton. Hand me the baton. So Alan Moore had an issue that he had written that nobody had illustrated. So it's like, okay, that's my first issue. Perfect. I'm going to illustrate an Alan Moore comic, and then I'm going to take the story from then. He has handed me the baton. I'm going with it somewhere. And
that sounds awesome.
That was kind of a fun way of doing comics. Was where do I start? Where am I going? Okay, and then I set that book up like, all right, now this is going to the next guy. I have handed him an awesome baton. I've got all these pieces in a row. Take it, and then nobody ever did. So it was like, what? You got a cool fight coming up. What the hell?
Someday.
Yeah, someday somebody will be able to take that one and run with it.
All right, let's get going on these comments too. Doom Patrol was an entire acquired taste. Steve Lytle was a smooth cat daddy.
Yeah, it was. He definitely had something going on, and there was people who were digging it, and I came and I just crapped all over that.
Comic Book Trap House says, you're the man, Mr. Larsen. I love anybody out there like Chapo Trap House, the podcast, one of my favorites. So I like that.
Oh, cool.
I like user. That's a great podcast. Comics. Oh, love the Comics Experience, T. We love Brian Hibbs of Comics Experience in San Francisco, friend of the show.
Yeah, that is a local store. That I can walk to that store from my house.
Okay. So, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Since we're on topic.
I am in San Francisco, and my house is conveniently located between Amazing Fantasy and Comics Experience. So both of those stores are my local store.
Awesome. Okay, Comic Booger says, since we're on topic, when did you decide it was okay to add porno-like imagery and adult sequences to Dragon? Did they need to be so excessive to get your idea across?
They don't need to be, but I figure I can do whatever the hell I want to, so I will. At some point it was, I mean, the book has always been somewhat risque. I know I would get letters from kids really, really early on in the book whose parents had discovered their Savage Dragon collection and had comics taken away from them. So that happened real early on for some kids. And it's just over time, it just sort of felt like, well, I've been teasing this shit for 20 years. Why don't I actually pay some of this off a little bit? And mostly, I don't think of it as sexy so much as kind of hilarious. Because the idea of superheroes having sexual relations and just like how crazy would that look, and what would that be like?
Right.
And for the most part, I do have my line in the sand where it's like I don't want to show certain things, and it's like, so there's definitely I could go further than I am, and this is actually me being restrained.
Hey, adults have sex. So does the dragon.
It's like whatever. I figure at this point the book is aimed at adults, so it's like it's an adult book. That's fine. Just do it that way.
Nate Costa wants to know when the inevitable third printing of 252 happens. What are the chances of a Far Side cover? Maybe your cousin Gary Larsen, whose name is incorrectly spelled, to even do the cover now that he's unretired. Is there a Far Side pastiche?
No. I don't know that. I don't know that there will be a third. The actual second printing of that book, crazily enough, is sold more than the first printing.
Oh, cool. We
So
like that.
yeah, so it's kind of crazy.
Okay. Dan Fragga Boom paid $1.99 to say he loves your shirt. Hey,
Oh,
Eric.
nice.
See, Frankie Fathand says cartoons peaked at Garfield.
Oh,
Not
good
sure.
Lord.
Depends what peak meant, I guess. Hey, Fragaboom. The archives are great. Dan's a good friend of the show and a new friend of mine. Randy Siplon says, Fragaboom, I got your Yaki Boy cover for me. You guys are talking to each other. We'll skip over to Eric. Eric, how many Kirby originals do you own?
Depends on what you're counting. If you mean Savage Dragon originals, I've got an ungodly stack of those. If you mean originals by other people.
No, he says Kirby from Jack Kirby.
Oh, Jack Kirby, 200 so.
Oh, is that all? Okay.
I don't have an exact count. So
I got a few hundred back here. I could trade. Maybe we could trade some sometime. Just kidding.
But at one point, I bought a number of complete issues. So yeah. I've got
awesome.
So I've got like I don't know 7 or 8 issues of Commandy. I've got a full issue of The Losers. I've got the Eternals annual. I've got an issue of Thor. I've got a smattering of I know.
Okay, Eric, are you out of here? We're
gonna your head in here.
Sorry, we've gone a long time. You've been really great. I'm just gonna burn through these things. These are just we have a few more
questions at this point.
Yeah. Any chance of a Savage Dragon Humble bundle, a la the Spawn bundle that came out recently?
We do those on occasion. I'm sure that there will be. I'm sure there will be one again. So.
Okay. Slow Dance Publication says he sent me a comic. I'm not sure. I did get something recently. We're going to review soon on the $1 Million Comics Cam. I'm not sure if this is your comic or not, but I just want to let people know very quickly. Eric, I know you got to get out of here, but I just want to let people know if you got comics you want to send to me, you can just send them to where? I'm sorry, Eric. Comic Book News with Dan Shaheen. P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518, and we'll put them up on the $1 Million Comics Cam, and we'll review them, and that will be fantastic. Okay, we got just a few more comments here. Oh man, stuff coming through here. Got another super chat that says the mainstream comic book industry is in trouble. I wonder why. Eric, no matter what, I'm grateful that I've known you. And that's it for super chats. I think the stuff about the comic book industry, this is people who have a very narrow conception of what the comic book industry truly is. They think that the rising and falling sales of monthly comics are the end all and be all of the comic book industry. You got any thoughts about that?
I mean, people are doing comics in all sorts of ways. There are, I mean, certainly right now, the biggest selling comics are people doing their own, usually those comics for teenagers that are coming out right now. Smile is like doing way better than any Marvel DC stuff. And and us superhero guys would look at that and go, "Oh, this is terrible."
Yes,
but it's
she knocked Stephen King off the New York Times bestseller list with that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's Rain is amazing. She's another dream guest for this show.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like that stuff does incredibly well. So to say, hey, comics, I wonder how comics aren't doing well. Well, I'll tell you why they're not doing well. It's because we got rid of the newsstand, because the newsstand dried up. We're doing comics for the trades, so those comics aren't satisfying as a monthly comic book read. I think they're less, they're not cheap and disposable the way they used to be, but you could argue, hey, they're better looking than they've ever looked.
Absolutely.
So that should be good too. it's tough. There's a lot of different factors that come into it. For me as a reader, my biggest factor is that I can't pick up any random comic and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think again, I think Jim Shooter would have a lot to say about that and how current comics are.
I mean, that's the biggest problem right now. Is you're just like, if I want to read a random copy of random comic, does it even make sense to me?
Well, one, if you can even find one, where are you going to get it?
Yeah. You have.
When you do, what does it mean? Yeah.
I mean, we could argue about that, and everybody's got their reasons. They think, well, it's because of all this kind of characters or that kind of characters. I'm like, no, not really.
It's storytelling. It just boils down to entertainment and storytelling. And Erik, you've been putting out hundreds and hundreds of issues of some of the most entertaining and fun comics. You've got an obvious true love of comics, not just the medium and the people and the industry, but all of it, dude. You are comics. And I thank you so much for taking the time. I had heard you're a shy guy. You're a busy guy. We couldn't shut you up today, Erik. I love it.
All right, man. Well, thanks for having me.
Okay.
And we'll do this again sometime.
I hope so. Thanks again. All right, comic book news fans. That was it. Erik Larsen. That was really fun and amazing. What a great guy with so many insights. He's thinking about things on many different levels. He's thinking about comics as an art form, as an industry, and as just pure goofy fun, because that's what they are. They're all of those things. They're all things to all men. So anyway, I've got closing credits here. We're going to see some of our sponsors and whatnot. If you click the little join button down below, you could see your name in these closing credits. But who watches closing credits? Who sticks around and watches closing credits? Well, the smart and informed people do, because they know there's a secret cameo at the very end of the credits. So stick around to check that out. And we will see you coming up pretty soon. When? Next time.
Good day, gentlemen.
Lawyer?
But of course. Now, if I may see a copy of the contract.
Hey, what What's going on?
Well, I guess those two had no intentions of negotiating in good faith. Now, aren't you glad you hired me?
See ya.